Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving headfirst into the fascinating, ultra-high-end world of arguably the most famous luxury watchmaker on the planet, Rolex. We're going to explore the history, the absolute precision engineering, and the masterful business strategies that somehow transformed a simple steel tool into the ultimate global status symbol. Let's get into it. Let's kick things off with a number that is, frankly, a little hard to wrap your head around. $17.75 million. Back in 2017, a vintage Rolex Daytona went up for auction in New York. Now get this, it wasn't made of solid gold and it definitely wasn't encrusted with diamonds, but it was previously owned by the legendary actor Paul Newman. It was actually given to him by his wife, Joanne Woodward, back in 1968. Well, it sold for a staggering $17.75 million, completely shattering auction records and becoming one of the most expensive wristwatches ever sold.
And that massive price tag raises a super fascinating question. How exactly did a simple steel watch build an empire? How does a mechanical object, one that was originally designed just to tell the time, transcend its basic function to command that kind of intense desire, value, and cultural prestige? To really answer that, we have to wind things all the way back to the very beginning.
So let's start with Section 1, Origin and Mainspring. The story actually begins in London, England. In 1905, a German businessman named Hans Wilsdorf and his brother-in-law Alfred Davis founded a company simply called Wilsdorf and Davis. They started out by importing Swiss movements and putting them into English watch cases. By 1908, Wilsdorf registered a brand new trademark for these watches, Rolex. But then, in 1919, heavy post-war taxes and incredibly high export duties on silver and gold made doing business in England completely unsustainable. So Wilsdorf just packed up and relocated the entire operation to Geneva, Switzerland, firmly cementing the brand's Swiss identity forever. Now, Hans Wilsdorf was a true marketing visionary long before that term even existed. He wanted a brand name short enough to fit elegantly on the tiny face of a watch and easily pronounceable in absolutely any language. But here is the most fascinating detail about that. Wilsdorf actually thought the fabricated word Rolex was onomatopoeic. He believed it sounded exactly like the physical clicking noise a watch makes when it's being wound. Moving right along to Section 2, Gears and Escapement. You see, Rolex really built its reputation on absolute, painstaking micromechanics and high horology. Inside one of these watches, every tiny gear, spring, and jewel has to work in perfect, frictionless harmony. It's like a giant puzzle. But in the early 20th century, even the absolute best movements had a fatal flaw. They were highly vulnerable to the outside world. In 1926, Rolex completely solved that vulnerability by introducing the oyster case. Back then, dust and moisture were the absolute enemies of intricate watch movements, just constantly ruining them. By utilizing a screw-down mechanism, Rolex created a revolutionary hermetically sealed vault that provided optimal waterproof and dust-proof protection. I mean, this was a massive, game-changing leap forward. But, of course, they didn't stop there. In 1931, Rolex patented the Perpetual rotor. This was an absolutely ingenious self-winding mechanism, featuring a semicircular plate that relied entirely on gravity to move freely. So what does this mean for the person wearing it? It meant the watch captured kinetic energy from your natural arm movements throughout the day to automatically wind the mainspring. You literally no longer had to manually wind it. Combining this incredible feature with the waterproof case gave birth to the legendary Oyster Perpetual, a watch that was completely protected from the elements and kept itself running, well, perpetually.
All right, let's dive into Section 3, the science of materials.
You know, most of the luxury Swiss watch industry uses standard 316L stainless steel, and it's great steel. But since 1985, Rolex has uniquely used 904L grade steel, which they've actually dubbed oyster steel. Now, there are some very specific trade-offs here. 904L provides incredibly high corrosion resistance, and when it's polished, it leaves a much more brilliant, beautiful luster than standard steel. However, the catch is that 904L is actually slightly softer, making it marginally easier to scratch. But Rolex clearly chose lasting beauty and corrosion resistance over pure surface hardness. Now, to combat scratches in other areas, Rolex turned to ceramics. In 2005, they introduced the Cerachrome bezel. This is a proprietary ceramic material used on the outer ring of their professional sports watches, and it is practically impervious to scratches. But better yet, unlike the older aluminum bezels that would noticeably fade over time from sunlight, the color in a Cerachrome bezel is highly UV resistant. It will literally never fade, maintaining its pristine look for generations to come.
Which brings us to Section 4, Case and Protection. But this time, we're talking corporate strategy.
Crafting a luxury timepiece requires intense scrutiny and total uncompromising control over every microscopic detail. Well, Rolex took this philosophy of meticulous internal control and applied it directly to their entire business model. They are notoriously secretive. They're owned by a private family trust, the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, meaning they never have to report to public shareholders. They operate with absolute autonomy.
This absolute control really functions through brilliant vertical integration. In the early 2000s, Rolex began buying up all their component manufacturers, most notably acquiring the movement maker Igler in 2004, bringing almost all production entirely in-house. Next up, they strictly controlled distribution through a highly exclusive authorized dealer network, and finally, they utilized strategic waitlists. As you might know, you almost certainly cannot just walk into a Rolex store today and buy a brand new steel sports watch. You basically have to be invited to purchase one. This loop of vertical integration, tight retail control, and intense scarcity maintains their totally unmatched brand prestige. 1.24 million. That is the estimated number of watches Rolex produced and sold in the year 2023 alone. Think about that for a second. They produce well over 1 million luxury watches a year, an astonishingly high output for this industry. Yet, because of their strict retail control and those waitlist strategies we just talked about, they maintain the illusion of absolute scarcity on a mass scale. It's a truly masterful strategy that gives them immense pricing power. And finally, Section 5, Dial and Display, looking at the brand's mystique. The stories surrounding this brand don't get much more remarkable than those from World War II. During the war, British Royal Air Force pilots were actively buying Rolexes out of their own pockets to replace their standard issue watches. But when captured by the Germans, their watches were instantly confiscated. When Hans Wilsdorf heard about this, he essentially offered an honor system. He replaced the watches for Allied POWs, requiring absolutely no payment until the end of the war. Over 3,000 watches were sent directly to prison camps. Famously, Corporal Clive James Nutting ordered a Rolex Oyster chronograph straight to his prison camp, Stalag Luft 3. That very watch was reportedly used to precisely time the guard patrols for the legendary prison breakout we now know as the Great Escape. How wild is that? And this mystique is just completely amplified by conquering extreme environments. In 1927, British swimmer Mercedes Gleitz wore a Rolex Oyster on a chain around her neck during an agonizing 10-hour swim in the freezing English Channel, proving its waterproof claims to the entire world. In 1953, the Rolex Explorer was launched to celebrate the successful ascent of Mount Everest. In 1960, they literally strapped an experimental watch to the outside of the Trieste bathyscaphe as it plunged 10,916 meters to the absolute bottom of the Mariana Trench, and it kept perfect time under crushing pressure. In 2012, filmmaker James Cameron repeated the feat with a brand new experimental Rolex. They didn't just sponsor athletes, you see. They attached themselves to the very limits of human exploration. So when you look at a Rolex today, with its perfect micromechanics, its proprietary steel, and a history that is literally tied to POW camps and the very bottom of the ocean, you really have to ask yourself, is it merely a tool to tell time, or has it become the ultimate symbol of human potential? It really proves exactly why the Rolex Perpetual machine isn't slowing down anytime soon. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.